Thanks everyone for attending. As she said, today I'm going to talk about measuring customer value. I think the title in the program is Measuring the Value You're Providing Customers. I'm going to talk about it through an engineering lens today because, well, I'm an engineer. And I'm going to talk about customer segmentation specifically today, which may seem unrelated to measuring the value you're providing your customers, but that's why I think it's an interesting topic. And hopefully by the end of this talk, you'll understand how you should change your segmentation strategy based on how you're measuring customer value. You know, as I said, when I listen to me on this topic, I'm an engineer. You always trust your engineering team, right? They always give you good estimates. But who am I? Patrick, co-founder and CTO of Vitally, based out of Brooklyn, New York. I've got a picture of my dog up here instead of me. Thanks to Hallie from our marketing team for putting that up there. He's named after a beloved appetizer. The emoji there gives you a hint, but I would take guesses, but you can put them in the questions if you have one. And I have a bachelor's in computer science from MIT, course 6.3, if there's any MIT people in the crowd. Who's Vitally? Vitally, we're a modern customer success platform for modern customer success teams. We help teams maximize their productivity through tools to visualize and collaborate around your customer data. My co-founder and I, he's also an engineer, former CTO. When we started Vitally, we wanted to use data to tie the customer success process more directly and quantitatively to customer value. Now, Vitally has evolved over time, and we've hugely expanded the set of tools that we have to actually affect customer value. But we always have an eye to how can we help teams put data behind their customer success process. I'm going to start with the conclusion of the talk, and hopefully we'll get back to it by the end. Your method for segmenting customers is failing you. Now, as an engineer, I'm obligated to say, I don't know anything about your business. Maybe your customer segmentation is working really well for you. But customer success is a relatively new discipline. And we talk to a lot of customers and prospects, and we see a lot of the same patterns when we talk to them that seem to have become standardized, but might not be giving you as much value as you might hope. And here at Vitally, we like to take a really hard look at those and question the conventional wisdom around what the market's doing and what's become standard. So before I talk about why you might be doing it incorrectly, let's just define customer segmentation. What is segmentation? Why do you do it? Why is it important? Put simply, segmenting your customers is grouping them by their shared attributes. Those groups are typically mutually exclusive, which is why we use the word segmentation as opposed to just grouping. And why do we do it? Why do we segment our customers? Because different types of customers need different treatment. And by grouping those customers into groups that need similar treatment, we can align our organization and processes around similar sets of customers. What are some of the strategies that we typically see that might not be adding that much value for you? So segmenting by demographic or firmographic information, that might be enterprise versus mid-market versus startup. It might be regional, US versus EU. We see that a lot, but companies A and B might be the same size, but think about how they use your product in completely different ways. Or they might be completely different sizes and think about how they use your product in the exact same way. Same with a customer in the EU versus one in the US. It's just not tied to outcomes or value in any way. Another one we see is stage, onboarding or renewing. That's a little bit better. Onboarding, you actually treat those customers differently than you do a mature customer. But once you get through onboarding, you've got either renewing or adopted or mature. That's not really adding that much to how you're treating those customers differently and how you're running them through your customer success process. The problem with these is, the reason I think that these have become common, it's using the data that you have rather than data that's actually valuable. But for that reason, they're not that actionable, and they're not that insightful. So why does customer success even exist? At a really, really high level, basically doing two things. They're optimizing the value a customer gets from your product, and they're communicating the value a customer gets from your product, the value they're receiving. At a very, very high level, that's basically it. Customer success exists because products are typically built to serve a broad range of use cases, a broad range of businesses, but every single customer you have gets value out of your product in completely different ways. And customer success exists to help bridge that gap. But to be able to bridge that gap, to be able to optimize value, you have to deeply understand where value comes from. That's not unique to customer success, obviously. It's important for the entire business to understand where value comes from in order to decide what product to build, how to sell the product, how to come to events like this and talk about the product at your booth. But I think it's especially important for customer success to understand in order to bridge that gap between the value a customer is currently getting and the maximum value that they could be getting out of your product. If CS is, you have to measure what you want to change. So if CS is responsible for optimizing customer value, they need to deeply understand where it comes from. So how do you measure customer value? As a CTO and engineer, I'm constantly thinking about optimizing systems. And one of the terms I use with my team all the time is you have to instrument before you optimize. If we hear from our users that the product is slow, we have to measure how long it takes for all of our APIs to return in order to know where to focus our efforts. If we just spend time optimizing the thing that we most recently touched, or whatever we think might be causing slowness, we won't end up, at least not that efficiently, actually solving the user's problem. You should think about your business and your CS process in the same way. Instrument, optimize, repeat. So how does that translate to measuring customer value? I put a framework up here that mimics the engineering lifecycle I just talked about, but for maximizing customer value. The first three steps here, question, define, and evaluate, those correlate with instrument or measure. You can question your customers, ask them pretty explicitly what outcomes or value they want out of the product. Distill those results into a set of core outcomes, and measure those outcomes as directly as possible. Ideally using product analytics, but I'll dive into a couple different strategies that you can also use if product analytics doesn't necessarily work for your business. Implement is optimize and repeat. Revisit those outcomes frequently with your customer and use them to drive your CS and business processes. Diving a little bit deeper into this, so step one is gather those outcomes. The easiest way to do this is just to ask. Your sales team is probably already doing this. They're probably already identifying pain points that a customer has, the reasons behind they're actually talking to you, and they're honing in on the outcomes that your customer wants to get when they purchase. If you have a self-serve motion, you might do this with an in-app survey during onboarding. We see this a lot with PLG-driven companies, where during an onboarding survey, you're asked for job title or department. Is this a VP versus an individual contributor? Is this an engineer, or is it someone from the sales department? These are typically focused on onboarding use cases, but especially if you run through this process that I'm talking through, where you understand the core outcomes that people get from your product, they're giving you a lot of information about what outcomes that person is trying to drive when they sign up for their product in the long run, not just during onboarding. You can also analyze customer support tickets to identify common issues and pain points. The really good ones here are not the ones that are just like, this product isn't working, there's a bug, or where can I find this, how do I do this? But where customer writes in and is trying to use your product in a certain way, but is blocked. They're trying to get more value, they're trying to achieve a certain outcome, but they can't. So those are the really interesting tickets where you can deeply understand the outcomes that they're trying to drive. Next, distill those outcomes. When you talk to your customers, especially if you're gathering those outcomes during the sales process, they're going to give you a really broad set of answers, that are very specific to their business. It's useful, obviously, to write those down and revisit them directly in the sales process and during the customer success process. But you're going to go crazy if you try and measure every single customer's desired outcomes directly. So you have to distill those outcomes, distill those things that they're trying to achieve with your product into a set of core outcomes, ideally that cover most of the types of use cases that your customers have. You've probably heard the term clustering, especially with all the talk about AI recently. But it's the process. What clustering is a term for basically a set of algorithms that allow you to group things together based on their shared attributes. What is segmentation really? It's drawing boundaries between your customers based on their shared attributes that make it easier to think about them as a group. It's clustering. You're taking those raw outcomes, you're taking the raw data, and trying to find the commonalities. And trying to find the commonalities that they have, the common outcomes, the core sets of outcomes. Now, in this graph, it's pretty perfectly delineated. You shouldn't try to perfectly delineate your customer outcomes. There's probably a set of core things that everyone wants to do that's shared across those groups, but it's still a useful thing to try to figure out what the core outcomes are and group them together. I'll talk a little bit about measuring outcomes as well. So I said earlier that product analytics is the most direct way to measure customer value, especially for SaaS companies, which should be basically everyone in the audience right now, where you actually have a product that people are logging into and interacting with. A couple examples of how you could do this, how you can tie product analytics directly to outcomes. If you're a customer support tool, for example, the customer might come to you and say, I want to automate more of my ticket responses. What you can do there is map the data you have around when people are responding manually and when they're auto responses directly to that outcome that they've come to you for. If you're a task management tool and a customer's coming to you because they're losing work or something, and they're a prior task management tool, you might want to measure how successfully are people searching for tasks? What percentage of tasks are they actually completing versus creating? If product analytics doesn't work for your business, or because many of the outcomes that your customers are trying to drive might not be directly measurable in your product, they might be business level metrics. You can also, once again, just talk to them about it. At Vatterott, we talk about having value reviews as opposed to your classic QBRs, where you talk to your customers about the outcomes that they spoke to you about in the sales process and track your progress towards them. So using the same examples I talked about earlier, a customer's buying a support tool, ultimately, they might be trying to reduce churn. Customer buying a task management tool might be an engineering team looking to ship more product. When you meet your customers, you should have those value reviews where you revisit them and track progress over time. You can also use surveys where you're capturing customer sentiment, but don't use generic surveys like NPS or CSAT. Try and survey those outcomes that you're trying to derive more directly. So you might see where I'm going with this. You should segment your customers based on those outcomes. So once you've figured out what the core outcomes are, the common sets of customers that are typically trying to drive them, you should align your organization around those outcomes. You should organize, make your customer success org chart aligned around those segments. Create product marketing resources, case studies, use cases that are driven towards those different segments, so that you can more efficiently provide value and optimize value for those customers. So that's the takeaway. I promised we'd get there from the beginning. I'll leave a couple key takeaways up here as well. Before optimizing customer value, you have to measure it. Product analytics is the most direct way to measure customer value. And you should segment your customers into personas based on shared outcomes, as opposed to demographic, firmographic information, or stage information. That's it. I mentioned value reviews during the talk. If you're interested, we have a template that you can use for those value reviews. QR code is up here. I'm not sure if there's any questions or time for questions, but if so, happy to take them now.
Second, hustling.
My question is, so I get what you're saying about how to segment them, but then once you have the segments, the only how do you use them and who uses them and in what meetings is this, and how you separate your customer success team by certain CS reps only pay attention to certain segments based on outcomes?
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is that you're building expertise within your customer success team around different types of customers, or the different, maybe it's the different parts of the product that they want to use, or different outcomes that they're trying to drive. If going back to my task management example, you might have a customer segment for people that deal with engineering teams, right? Who have a lot of expertise around how to run sprints, what type of reports that engineering teams typically want in a task management tool. That might be completely different from how a sales team interacts with a tool like Jira or Asana. They have completely different outcomes they're trying to drive. They want to use your product in different ways. And trying to have a customer success team that's an expert in both of those is just not that efficient. If you align your customer success team in your organization and the resources you have around those different outcomes or personas of your customers, then they can actually become experts and drive and optimize customer value, teach customers best practices in a way that they can't if they're trying to deal with all sorts of different disparate customers.